The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of pale dust, its wheels creaking like tired bones. Jacob Miller stood a little straighter beside the hitching post, brushing his palms against his worn trousers for the third time in a minute. The small frontier town of Willow Creek was quiet at midday, as it usually was, but today every sound felt louder to him. The horses snorting, the leather straps shifting, the murmur of the driver as he climbed down. This was it. He swallowed hard. Jacob had faced down stampedes, blizzards, and a cougar once, but nothing had made his heart pound like this moment. The letter he'd sent 3 months ago to the mail-order bride agency in St. Louis had felt like a desperate gamble back then. A lonely rancher, 27 years old, no family left, no real prospects for meeting a woman out here. He'd never even properly courted anyone. The idea of writing to a stranger and asking her to marry him had seemed half mad. And yet, here he was. The driver opened the coach door and helped a woman down. She wasn't what Jacob had imagined. She was smaller than he'd pictured, for one thing, with chestnut brown hair pinned neatly under a modest hat. Her traveling dress was simple but clean, the fabric a soft blue that somehow made her eyes look brighter. She took in the town with a calm, observant gaze, not the frightened or overwhelmed look he'd expected. Then her eyes found him. Jacob's breath caught. She smiled first. "You must be Mr. Miller," she said, her voice warm and steady. He nodded too fast. "Yes, ma'am. I mean, yes, Jacob Miller." She stepped closer and held out her gloved hand. "I'm Clara Whitmore." Her handshake was firm, not shy, and that alone unsettled him in the strangest way. Most women he'd known, mostly ranch wives and store clerks, had always seemed guarded around him, like they weren't sure what to make of a big, quiet man who didn't talk much. Clara didn't seem guarded at all. The driver unloaded her single trunk and set it down beside them. Jacob paid him, thanked him, and then they were standing there, alone, with the future suddenly very real between them. "Well," Clara said lightly, glancing at the modest main street. "This is Willow Creek." "That's most of it," Jacob admitted. "My ranch is about 5 miles west. I've got a wagon." "Sounds perfect," she replied. As they rode out of town, the prairie stretching wide and golden around them, Jacob kept stealing glances at her from the driver's seat. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the land with quiet appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He blinked. "Most folks call it empty." She smiled at him. "Empty isn't the same as peaceful." Something eased in his chest at that. They reached the ranch by late afternoon. The house was small but sturdy, freshly whitewashed just for her arrival. Jacob had spent weeks fixing every loose board and crooked hinge, terrified she'd take one look and regret everything. Clara stepped down from the wagon and looked around slowly. "This is your home," she said. "Our home," Jacob corrected, then flushed. "I mean, if you still want." She turned to him, her eyes kind. "Jacob, I traveled 1,000 miles to be here. I'm not going to turn back because your porch creaks." That night, over a simple supper of beans, bread, and roast chicken, they talked more than Jacob had talked in years. Clara told him about St. Louis, about working as a seamstress, about her widowed mother and 2 younger brothers she'd helped raise. Jacob told her about his parents' ranch, how he'd inherited it at 21, how the loneliness had crept in slowly until one day he realized he couldn't bear the quiet anymore. They laughed awkwardly at first, then more easily. Later, when the dishes were done and the oil lamp cast a soft glow across the room, the reality they'd both been carefully sidestepping finally settled between them. "So," Clara said gently, folding her hands, "we should probably talk about expectations." Jacob's ears burned. "Yes, ma'am," she smiled. "You don't have to call me ma'am." "Yes, Clara, sorry." She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Jacob, I want to be honest with you. I've never been married. I've had suitors, but nothing serious ever came of it. His relief was immediate, and then guilt followed it. I've never. He stopped, took a breath. I've never even kissed a woman. Clara's eyebrows lifted slightly. I know that's not ideal, he rushed on. But I'm not foolish about marriage. I've read books. I've talked to the preacher. I've practiced. Practiced, she echoed, amused. He nodded, mortified. With dancing, and conversation, and trying to be a gentleman. Her laugh was soft and kind, not mocking. That's not what most men practice. I'm not most men, he said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara leaned forward a little. Can you handle me? She asked. Not teasing, not bold, just honest. Jacob's heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He swallowed. I don't know, he admitted. But I promise you I'll do my best to be worthy of you. Something in her eyes softened at that. They agreed to sleep in separate rooms until the wedding ceremony, which they planned for the following Sunday. Willow Creek's preacher was happy to oblige, and the townsfolk buzzed with curiosity about the new woman in Jacob Miller's life. Over the next week, they learned each other in small, careful ways. Clara helped him cook and clean, her efficiency quietly transforming the house. Jacob showed her the ranch, the barn, the creek where the water stayed cool even in summer. They talked at night, long conversations that wandered from dreams to fears to silly stories from childhood. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills, Clara surprised him by taking his hand. You're very gentle, she said. He stiffened. Is that bad? No, she replied, squeezing his fingers. It's rare. On Sunday, under the open sky, with a handful of neighbors as witnesses, Jacob and Clara were married. That night, back at the house, the nervousness returned in full force. They stood awkwardly in the bedroom, neither quite sure what to do next. Clara broke the tension first. Jacob, she said softly. We don't have to rush anything. Marriage is more than one night. He let out a shaky laugh. Thank you. They sat on the edge of the bed, just holding hands. I meant what I said, he told her. I've practiced being patient, being kind, being a good husband. She leaned her head against his shoulder. That's what matters most. They shared their first kiss then. Gentle, clumsy, sincere. And that was enough for that night. In the weeks that followed, their marriage grew not from passion, but from trust. They learned each other's habits, each other's moods, each other's quiet strengths. Jacob learned that Clara sang softly while sewing. Clara learned that Jacob talked to his horses like old friends. They argued once, about money, and resolved it without raised voices. Slowly, naturally, affection deepened into something stronger. One evening, months later, Clara stood in the doorway of the barn watching Jacob work. You know, she said thoughtfully, I asked you once if you could handle me. He smiled. And I said I'd practiced. She walked over and took his hands. Turns out, you didn't need practice at all. You just needed a heart. Jacob pulled her into a gentle embrace, the prairie stretching endlessly around them, the quiet no longer lonely at all. And for the first time in his life, Jacob Miller knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.